In this Well Seeker Pro training video, I'll be introducing the Well Analytics module and we'll take a look at the inputs and the various outputs associated with it. The first thing that we're going to do is look at the daily reporting, as the information entered here is what feeds the Well Analytics. Daily report creation and functionality is covered in more detail in another training video, but it's important to understand the value of the data entered here. When populating the daily reporting section of the software, the level of accuracy and volume of details included has a big impact. The more you put in, the more you get out. So the first thing that we're going to look at is the daily activity grid on the main user interface of the daily reporting dialog. A lot of the information entered here is used to calculate the KPI metrics, so the inputs here are important for our Well Analytics. Things like our dates, start and end time, which allows us to calculate how long we spent doing a particular activity. Start depth, end depth allows us to calculate the course length, again for a particular activity like drilling. BHAs, phases and activities themselves. Now our activities can be selected from a large drop-down menu, and the selection that we make here allows the program to determine what has actually happened on that line, and this will, again within the analytics themselves, allow us to lump all of our data together. So the activities are fairly important, and we have got several different codes. So for example, code 2s are for drilling. We can see slide and rotary drilling. Code 5 would be for circulating. Code 8 is for rig MPT, and code 26 is for directional MPT. Now within the Well Analytics dialog there is a lot of searchable features, and this is something that we'll take a look at a little bit later on in the video. But the features that are, or the options that are searchable, are all defined within the daily reports. So for example, our well status. So well status can be selected from a drop-down list, and within our Well Analytics we can select all wells that are active for a given operator, or all wells that were active over a certain date range. We've got standby, TD, complete, end of well report ready, end of well report sent, transferred, upcoming and verified. Other things which are searchable would include things like the state and the county within the well data and personnel dialog. So we can search for all wells that were drilled in a given county, for example, for a certain operator or for all operators in the database. And a lot of our other options are detailed within the drill string editor. A lot of data is put into the drill string editor from the main user interface and also within the performance report itself. And a lot of the options or the values that are entered here become searchable. So as an example, for a motor, we can search for certain motor serial numbers, so we can find out all the jobs a given motor's been on. We can look for things like hole size, which is determined by the OD of the bit. We can look for certain assemblies, ones that include motors, ones that include rotary steerable, for example. We can look at search for motor configurations, and within the performance report we can determine whether or not an assembly has been pulled out successfully or was pulled without failure, or whether there was a failure associated with it. So it could be a motor failure, MWD, catastrophic, or an unplanned trip. When the data is entered correctly in here and then saved within the database, it's very easy to then search for all assemblies that had failed motors or any failures at all, or it can be broken down based on the values that are entered in here. So with all the relevant data populated in the daily reporting, we can now view the various KPI charts for the individual well itself. And we can do that from the toolbar along the top. And the first one that we'll take a look at would be our depth versus time. And this is populated based on the data that's been entered in our daily activity grid. And we can select to colour it by activity, break it down by phase, or by BHA. And we can also access the KPI tracking. So within the KPI tracking, we've got quite a few graphs that we can access. So for example, here we have the phase summary, so the breakdown of the well based on the phase, how many days and what percentage of the entire job was spent on each phase. ROPs per run, footage per run, footage per day, and the footage per day is also broken down into how much was rotated and how much was sliding. Footage per phase, this gives us the amount of hole that was drilled for a given phase. ROP per phase, NPT per phase, so this is directional MPT, it doesn't include the rig MPT. Drilling hours per phase, activity summary for the entire well, so this takes into consideration all phases, so how much was, or how long was spent on each particular activity. And then we can see the activities per phase, so this just keeps it broken down into its various phases, and you can scroll down to see that for each one. So these KPI metrics that we've looked at in here were very specific for this given well. So based on having data like this for multiple wells in the database, we can now use the well analytics to compare the different wells against each other. So the well analytics can be accessed from the toolbar along the top, or it can be accessed from any level in the database tree by right-clicking, going to reporting, and then opening up well analytics. So this opens the well analytics dialog. And along the top of the dialog we've got some menu options. Below there we've got some shortcut buttons. To the left hand side we have our database tree, and on the right hand side we have got three tabs. We have our search tab, map tab, and KPI tab. Before we can generate the KPI outputs, we first need to select the relevant wells that we want to compare. And there are two ways to do that. The first way is just by manually selecting the wells that we want from the database tree. This is fairly straightforward when there's just a couple of wells, but if there's a few wells that you want to select, the second option, which is the search tab, is probably the easiest to use. As you can see, within this tab there are a lot of features that we can select to search for. So we can search operator, given date range, distance from a given well. We can look at formations, assembly types, failures, state, directional company, well status, rig, motor serial number, and several more options. So we'll take a little look at this now. So if we just, for example, search an operator, and here we're going to search Innova Natural Resources, and we just hit search. And this is going to come up with a few available options down the bottom. We can then further refine our search. So in here, for example, if we select ignore offsets, search again, that further reduces it down to 7. And all that this does is it tells the program, when you're looking, do not include any wells that don't have daily reports associated with them. So this just allows us to filter out the wells that don't have daily reports and basically data associated with them. And we can further filter this down, say for example failures, so we can see if any of these have got failures associated with them. And we have got 1. So you can see it's fairly easy in order to run the search parameters. And if we take a little look at these options available within here, we talked about the search. and we can very easily clear the results. Search again. Reset filters just resets any options that you have up here. Down here we've got two options, check all and uncheck all, and if we scroll to the right hand side of our wells, we have got options to include these wells within our search, or sorry, within our comparison. So we can uncheck all, check all, or we can come and manually check these by just physically checking or unchecking the box. If we select a given well, for example, if we select 1H and we select open job, it will close our dialog and it will open up the job within the database tree. As you can see, it's just done here. Once we've made the relevant selection that we want, in order to select these wells within our database tree, all that we need to do is use select wells, and any wells that are in the dialog down here that are selected to be included will then just be automatically selected within the database tree. And we can also use the deselect and it will uncheck those. So if we take a look at a few of the options that we have available, what you have within the database will be available from the drop down. So in assembly type, it's only ever going to be motor or RSS, but there are certain other options, for example, bitmake. This will look at your daily reports, it will look at the drill string editor within there, and it will look at the various makes of the bits that you have, and that will give you all of the options that are available to you. So depending on the wells that you have selected, these options may change. Same for things like motor make. County, again, it will look at the counties for all of the relevant wells that you have selected or you have available to you within the database tree. And the same for things like the motor serial number. So here, these are the motor serial numbers that are available within all BHAs in the database tree, and these will be available for you to select from. So all in all, this gives you the ability to very quickly filter out the data so that it's only the relevant wells that you want selected, and just saves a lot of time and effort into manually finding the information yourself. So once we have the relevant wells that we're interested in selected in the database tree, this is when we can start to look at some other functions within the Well Analytics dialog. For example, on the bottom right here, we've got our database QC report. Once you have the wells selected here, you can choose to print, and it will open up an Excel document that gives you all of the relevant data for the selected wells. So things like your coordinate reference systems, surface locations, ground level elevations, depth datums, system datums, north references. So this just gives you a report with all the high level information for your given selected wells. We can also then start to look at our other two tabs, our map tab and our KPI tab. We'll go and look at our mapping tab now, but before I do, the options at the top right hand side of the search tab relate to the map. So within the map, we can zoom in using our scroll button on our mouse, or with the plus or the minus on the right hand side here, and we can see that we've got not just the surface locations selected, but we also have our plans on here, and we have our lease line. And those options can be determined within here. Do we want to show the well plans, the well paths? So that would be the actual surveys. Do we want to show the planned wells? Do we want to include the lease lines? Do we want to include the well names? Here we can zoom in, we can select the satellite. These wells I've selected are all just on one pad, and you can zoom in and you can see exactly what's happening and where your wells are going. Something that you should be aware of is if your surface locations for your wells don't sit exactly on the pad, that's not something you should be too concerned about. Google Maps and Google Earth use WGS84 as the coordinate reference system. If the coordinate reference system that you are referencing does not utilize the same setup as WGS84, then it's not, your surface locations are not going to sit exactly where you expect them to be. If they're sitting off to the side a little bit, it's not, that's not unexpected. So there's nothing going on there. It's just you're trying to plot one coordinate reference system onto another. So that's where any discrepancy you see will come. And that just allows you to take a look at all of your wells that you have selected and where they are on a map. We'll now take a look at our KPI tab, and to do that I'm actually going to select some different wells here. So we're going to deselect those wells, clear our results, and in this case I'm just going to select all the wells under Ventura E&P. So it's very easy for me to do that just by checking the box at operator level. I could have also done it through the search. And I'm going to come across to my KPI tab. Now at the moment the KPI tab's greyed out, and it will stay greyed out until I select to generate the KPI. So if I do that, we now have our KPI generated. We've got lots of different options to select from, and our output is down here. We have an option to show or hide the tree, and when you're actually made your selection and once you've selected everything within the database tree, it's always really good just to be able to hide this so that we have a full screen in front of us and we make the most of it, especially when we've got a lot of data like I've got selected here. So we'll start by taking a look at the options that we have here at the top of the chart. The selections that you make here directly affect the chart and the way that it outputs. So if we start with a white chart, fairly self-explanatory, it just changes the back from being black to white. White is a lot easier on your printer cartridge, so that's generally the best option if you're going to be printing out these plots. For each of our selected wells, at the bottom of the data that's being displayed, we've got the name of the rig and we've got the well name. The short name option just removes the rig name from the front and gives you a little bit more space in here, so that's one option. Sanitized is another option, and this is a really good option if you want to show this data to anybody, because the data along the x-axis, the information, is the main way to identify what wells you're looking at. If you just hit sanitized, it just changes it to generic well 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. And it just means that you can show this data to anyone without fear of them knowing exactly where the data comes from. The sort data option, when checked, will sort your wells in terms of the footage. So it will go from the lowest footage at the left to the highest footage on the right. And if it's unchecked, then it obviously just leaves them as they were. The export option, if you select it, it will open up Excel document, and within it, it will give you the relevant data that is being used in those charts in an editable format. If you want to print or take a copy of this chart itself, you can do that via the File menu, where you can print the current chart to Excel, or you can print it to PDF. We just print this to PDF. And there you go, there's your PDF of your chart. If you want to, in the file option, you can also print all of the charts to Excel or all of the charts to PDF. And export all chart data will take the same information that you generated from your export option here, but instead of just being for one, it will be for all of them. We'll now take a look at some of the options that are available from the drop-down menu here at Select KPI. So the first one in the list is going to be the slide and rotation footage. And we can see that this gives us the slide footage and the rotation footage for the option that we've got selected here as the phase. And for this, we've selected the entire well. So this just gives us a breakdown of how much we've slid, how much we've rotated for the whole well. And this can be further broken down into any particular phase. And we can see that sometimes, depending on the options that we've selected, some of the wells don't have any data, and that's because they don't have the selected phase associated with them. So wells 3, 10, 11 and 12, they don't have an intermediate phase within the daily reporting. The rest of the wells do. And that's not necessarily unexpected. And there we are. So that option will be available for a lot of the selected KPI plots, but not all of them, and we'll see that as we go down. So if we now look at the next option, which is depth versus days, this is the perfect example. We cannot select or change this by phase. It's just a case of the depth versus days. Although we do have an option, which is an additional option, to colour them, the options, or to colour the lines by phase, BHA, activity, or the well itself. And this will allow us to compare our depth versus time plots for all of our wells. One additional option that we have available to us for the depth versus days is up here in the depth versus days menu, and it says remove flat time from start. So if I check that, in order to activate that option that I've just selected, I'll need to regenerate the KPI. And what it does is any flat time at the beginning where the depth does not change, when I generate my KPI, it will remove that. So you can see it moves all of my lines across to the left and brings them so that they're a more realistic comparison against each other. Because if you have a well that started and went for 5 days where the team was on the rig and they weren't drilling, that flat time means you won't start until further on with your depth versus days plot. So by selecting to remove flat time at the start, it pulls it all in so that they look, they start comparing at the same point. You can see that this is pushed across a little bit further when it's not selected. Our failure analysis. So within the failure analysis, you will get your MTBF values for the selected wells, and it will give us the proportion of successful BHAs versus unsuccessful. So of the wells selected, we have got 5 unplanned trips and 1 motor failure and 48 successful BHAs. We have directional cost per foot. Now this is based on the costings that are entered within the daily reporting. So as long as you have costings entered, this information can be generated. If you have not filled in any costings, then there will be no information available. Again, well cost per foot. And the well cost per foot will include the spread cost of the rig. So you can enter the spread cost in here, and that will be associated with the rest of the information. BHA details. So for all the selected wells, this will now display all the different BHAs that are associated with those wells. And in this case, there are 54. And it's just going to give you a lot of information in one page regarding depth in, depth out, how much was drilled for each one, drilling hours, rotating hours, ROPs, bit makes. We can clearly see over here the failures, the unplanned trips, the reason why they were pulled out of hole. And if we want to, we can sort the various columns. So if we were looking for something that had the best average ROP, you can check the top and you can see now that it has given me the best average ROP now at the top, filtered to the, or sorted to the lowest one at the bottom. And that's what these green bars represent. So the larger the amount populated in green, the more or the higher the value in comparison to everything else. If you are looking at a given BHA and you're interested to find out a little bit more about it, you can directly access that BHA by double clicking on the relevant line. And when you do that, it will open the drill string editor for that particular BHA and give you access to all the information regarding it. So you can go in, you can have a look at the performance reports, and you can take any information from there without having to close down your dialog. Next option that we have in our list is the detailed cost breakdown. And this plot just gives us a detailed well cost based on the phase. So it breaks down the costs for the relevant phases for each of the wells. And then we've got some plots that are relevant to the wells in particular. So the number of wells by a particular formation, directional company, motor make or bit make. So here, for example, with the motor make, we can see a specific type of motor and how many of the selected wells were drilled with those motors. And then we also have some that relate to ROP and footage. So it's what was our ROP and footage by a given formation, directional company, motor make, bit make, and by hole size. So if we look at this by bit make, and by hole size. And we can see that this gives you the relevant footage, rotating and sliding. And we have a selection of other options available. I'm not going to go through all of them, I'll just show you a couple. So we have activity comparison, we have our phase comparisons per well, we've got wells by rig, ROP and footage per rig, parameter comparison, well section performance, average interval cost by quarter, and drillers performance. So this is based on the directional drillers as they've been entered in the personnel section for each of the daily reports, and this will give you a breakdown of their slide and rotation footage, their ROPs, and their slide grades as well. So we've now gone through all the various charts that are available from the KPI tab within the Well Analytics. The last things that we're going to take a look at are some of the KPI reports. And in order to do that, we need to go back to the Search tab. So for the KPI reports, the first options that we're going to look at are going to be the top four in the list: the Motor KPI Summary, MWD KPI, and Section KPI. And we're going to look at these together because in order to generate the reports, we need to have some wells selected. Now there are two places that we can select our wells. We can either have them selected in the database tree as we currently have, or they can be selected via the search and displayed in the wells section at the bottom of the search tab. At the bottom of the KPI reports, there is an option that says Get Well List from Search Grid. So this is unchecked at the moment, and if I was to press Motor KPI, because I've got my options selected in my database tree, the report will print out. But if I check this option, I don't currently have any wells selected in here. If I now try to print off my Motor KPI, it's going to come up with an error. No wells selected, use database search function to find wells. So I can do that. Now we've got some wells selected in here. If I select Motor KPI, it's going to print it out. So depending on how you want to select your data. If you want to select it just based on what you have in the database tree, then you need this option unchecked. If you want to select it based on what's in the search grid, then you just check this option. But be aware that if you try to print this off and this option's checked, if you have nothing in here, you will get a warning. So if we take a look at the motor KPI, the motor KPI will basically generate a report that has everything related to the motor assemblies within the options, within the wells that are selected. And it will give you all the information relating to these. So it gives you the operator, job number, well, dates in and out, depths in and out, totals drilled, mud information, motor description, all the relevant information that has been filled in the motor components section of the drill string editor, and any comments that we have. And this is for every single motor within the selected wells. The motor KPI summary, this is just going to give us a summary of everything. So it breaks it down into the manufacturers. So of all the wells we've selected, they only utilise 3 different types of motors. We have 47 Renegade, 6 NOV, 1 Baker Hughes. And it gives us the relevant stats that we need for those. Also gives us the motors by size and by state. The MWD report, and this is very similar to the motor report except it's specific for the MWD. So any MWD related information from the components section in the BHA and also from the performance report will be detailed in this report. And finally, the section KPI. So the section KPI is broken down into several tabs. So we have all phases in the initial one, and this will just give us absolutely everything. So here, for example, this is all the phases in each individual well lumped together, and then we'll have a well summary, and we have a breakdown of all the relevant information for each of the phases. So the next set of reports that we'll look at will be the revenue report, rig day report and personnel report, and also the rig day chart and the revenue chart. Now these differ from the other reports in that it's a date range that these rely on and not a selection of wells. So if I was to select the revenue report at the moment, I'm going to get an error to tell me that there's no date range selected. So in order for me to generate any of these reports, I need to have a date range of some description selected, and they do not rely at all on well selection. So they just search the given date range across your entire database and they will pull the relevant information based on that. So to do that, in the search tab, all we need to do is select, uncheck this, we'll select our dates. I'll just put the 1st of July 2019 and the 26th of February 2020. If I then select my revenue report, this will start with my initial date range, which was the 1st of July, and we've got the number of rigs on that day, the revenue from the rig, and the specific job details, and we have a total revenue for the date range selected. So if we move along here, we can see that some of these have only got 1, some of the days have got none, and as we move across, some have 2 days. A little bit further along, we've got a few that have got some more days. And this will just detail the number of rigs, total revenue, and then individual job details for these. So our rig day report very similar in terms of the layout, except this time we've got the number of rigs for the day, we have a 30-day and a 10-day average, and then the job details. So again, this will give you your average rig count and all the jobs that we're running on a given day. And our personnel report. So this will give you details of your personnel name, the total number of days, their utilisation, and then a list of all the different jobs they were on and the number of days. And it will list all your personnel, and as we move along here, it will be marked in green the days that are relevant to them, so you very quickly and easily see when each personnel was utilised. If we take a look at the rig day chart, again this is just a graphical representation of the tabulated report that we saw earlier on, with our rigs, 30-day and our 10-day average. And our revenue chart. Again, this is going to be our revenue based on each day, and we can also see we have the rig count along the way as well. Now, the last KPI report that we're going to look at is the well ranking, and similar to the 4 options at the top, this will generate values based on well selection, so whether that well is selected in the search grid or whether they're chosen directly from the database tree depends on the option that you've got selected. And when we choose well ranking, it gives us a report where all of our individual wells are listed, and we've got certain columns with certain metrics like average ROP, curve ROP, lateral ROP, slide percentage, well length, lateral length, failures, and the number of days. And for each of these columns, it will highlight in green the best value, and for some of these that will be the highest value, for example ROP, and for others it will be the lowest value in terms of failures or the number of days. The software will then look at, in each of these columns, how a given value rates against the best value, and the maths in the background will pull together a score which will rate these somewhere between 0 and 1. That's us now going through the various well analytics features within WellSeeker. We're now going to take a look at some questions. I'm going to read out the questions one at a time, and after I've read the question, if you hit pause and try and answer the question yourself, and then once you're ready, hit play and see if your answer matches mine. So question number 1. At what level in the database tree do you access the well analytics? The answer is at any level. Unlike some of the other options where you have to be on a specific level, for well analytics you can access this at any level within the database tree via the reporting option. Question number 2. When generating a KPI revenue report, what specific search parameter is required? So for the revenue report, a date range is required. It's not selecting a given well, you just enter a date range and the software will search and generate your report based on that. Question number 3. Well Analytics utilises data from what part of WellSeeker? Daily reporting. So everything that you search for within the Well Analytics comes from the daily reporting module within the software. That will be the daily drilling reports themselves, the slide sheet, and the BHA. Question number 4. Where can you find MTBF data for the selected wells? This can be found in the Failure Analysis chart located in the KPI tab of the Well Analytics dialog. So for the end of video exercise, you'll be supplied with a database which contains a few wells with daily reporting data included. Alternatively, if you have your own database with the appropriate data included, then you can use this instead. Take a look at the KPI data in the individual wells within the daily reporting dialog, and then use the well analytics to search and compare these wells against each other. If at any point you become stuck, refer back to the video for a refresher. This now concludes our Well Seeker Introduction to Well Analytics training video.